welcome back to Apaka Podcast. This is episode 5 of our Lore Drop series, where we go behind the scenes and explore the setting of our post-apocalyptic adventure before it starts. Today we will continue exploring the continent of Kitakita, focusing on Zebulon, the semi-fertile eastern edge of the continent, and the spice traders who live there. As I've said a couple times by now, there is a large mountain range that runs north to south on the west side of the continent. Since the winds typically come from the west, this creates a desert in the middle of the continent. As you move across the desert from west to east, it starts out rocky and becomes progressively sandier. Finally, the continent is wide enough that changing winds and coastal effects cause increased rain along the edges of the continent, creating savanna-type biomes. I actually did a Google's voice search for what makes the difference between a rocky desert and a sandy desert, and I swear the first entry that Google found me was, if the wind blows west to east on your desert, then the eastern portion will be sandier than the west because the wind blows the sand over to the east. I swear, it was so funny because it was so closely matched with what I already had in my head, but I didn't have it in my head for any other reason than I thought it would be cool to have sand pirates and sand surfing. Anyway, so around the perimeter of the continent, from the south edge through the east edge, you're going to have these narrow, savanna-y style biomes. And when I say narrow, I mean narrow compared to the continent. They are large enough that you're not going to have any issue treating them like their own region. Kind of like how California compares to the rest of the United States. Finally, I picture a smoother transition into the ocean, with sandy beaches, which, as I talk this out, makes a lot of sense with the whole the wind blows the sand to the east idea. Wow, it's almost like I know what I'm doing. I'm thinking the climate is going to have a sub-Saharan Africa feel to it, so you may have some larger mammals like giant sloths or something like that. It's also going to be less deadly than the rest of the continent. There's still going to be predators and things like that, but they aren't quite so focused on killing you. The east is also going to have more edible plant life, like spices and herbs, maybe some exotic fruit trees like coconuts or mangoes. And because of ocean access, I'm thinking the people who live there are probably going to have more of a Mediterranean-style diet, heavy in seafood. People will still probably eat meat, but it's not as popular as, say, over in the west where you don't have access to the water. And with everything being more deadly, there's kind of this you have to think like a predator to not get eaten by a predator mindset. So when you put this all together, you have this mini economy of sorts because we have different kinds of resources in the world. The people in the east will collect their spices and things and transport those across the desert to the central trading hub. The people from the north will bring down technology, and the people from the west will bring meat and maybe, I don't really want to call them spices, but maybe different herbal plant life. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if some people started bringing water from the mountains, like spring water or ice, because most of the people on this continent are going to be living in the desert, where water is kind of a rarity. And so when you bring this all together, all the different regions work together and complement each other. Now, I'm not going to review the full history of the region right now, but basically, some people got to Zebulon and set up camp. Perhaps they were survivors through the apocalypse, or maybe they woke up from stasis early. It doesn't matter right now. Whatever the case, these early arrivers noticed the land was nice and habitable, especially compared to the rest of the continent. But they also noticed it wasn't very large. So these settlers came together and established a guild, or gang, depending on your opinion, called Zebulon's Traders, as a way to protect their claim to this land and basically keep outsiders from overcrowding the place and pushing out the original settlers. Because, as you can imagine, due to the nature of the East not being quite as deadly as the rest of the continent, there's actually a rather high demand to try and live over there. And so, Zebulon's traders act as these guardians that say, this is our claim and we're not just letting anybody in, this is a restricted community. I'll probably add different natural barriers to the desert so the Southeast Gang can effectively control who comes and goes. Perhaps some mesas or pseudo-mountainous regions combined with the increased sandiness of the desert in the east anyway. Zebulon's traders probably can't catch everyone, but they can definitely make sure that there's not a huge influx of people at any given time. And there's probably some regulatory system such as handing out credentials. Currently, I'm leaning towards ancient artifacts that get passed around between different traders to prove that they're authorized dealers. So that is Zebulon, the semi-fertile eastern edge of Kitakita, and the traders that inhabit the land. As I mentioned in our last lore drop, I have been working with one of my players, Relic, to create a continent map based on these lore drops. Last week I met up with him, and we had a great discussion absolutely filled with teaser content. I am so excited to share this world with you guys, I could just not keep my mouth shut, especially about some of the unique animals that live in each of the regions. If you want access to concept art, such as the continent map, then follow me on Instagram or Twitter at the ABCGM. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Apaka Podcast Lore Drops. This is the ABC Game Master signing off. I'll see you next time.